Hello YouTube. This video is going to be a video of all the GPUs which I have on my GPU shelf in my room. You might have seen them before on previous videos, but in this video I'm going to go through them all individually, maybe tell you a few specs or some stuff about them. So I've got the AMD cards on the left, the Nvidia cards on the right. And yeah, we're going to go through them, just explain a little bit about them. Hope you enjoy this video. So we're going to start off here with the 3000 series cards first, on the left at the oldest AMD cards, and work our way to the newest AMD cards before moving on to Nvidia. So we have the Sapphire 3850 here. Now this is an AGP card. I've actually got two of these. These cards here are just the ones on my shelf. I've actually got another one of these in a box. As you can see, it's a custom PCB. It's got a single 8-pin connector here, and it's a pretty nice card overall. It's got a nice little VRM heatsink down here, and unfortunately you can't crossfire AGP cards. So you can only use a single one of these in an AGP system. It was one of the fastest AGP cards ever made. It was actually maybe even the fastest. I think only the 4670 AGP may have had 1 gig of RAM, and this only has 512 megs. But I'm not sure which of those two GPUs was fastest, or whether they're the same GPU rebranded. But this is a very fast AGP card, so it's one of the better cards in my collection here. Moving on, we have got the pair of Sapphire 3870s, and these are the Vapor X Toxic editions. They are actually single slot, which is unusual for 3870s, because the reference card was actually a 2-slot design, but because these being Vapor X cards with more efficient heat sinks, they could actually make them really thin. So you can run these two cards in Crossfire and they have quite a bit more breathing room, especially when they're sandwiched together in like an older board. So that is pretty nice. Both of these take 6-pin connectors. So if I want to run 4-way Crossfire, I don't know whether you can with these. They have 2 fingers, but I'm not sure whether they only support up to 3-way Crossfire. But anyway, I've got 4-way covered, because I have two 3870X2s here. You can see through the clear sort of shroud that there's a heatsink for each GPU, one down the middle for the VRM, and also these little pin fins on the outside for the VRM. Now when you're running these cards, especially in Crossfire, they do get really hot, especially when you crank the voltage up. So I do usually put a fan on these, or pointing at the pins on the outside, just to get a bit of airflow through them, because obviously the fan here only blows through the card. It doesn't actually blow over this external part of the VRM heatsink here, which isn't ideal. But they're both really good cards, and of course you can Crossfire these two for 4-way, which is really nice. They take a 6 and an 8-pin, which is fairly standard for an AMD card of this age with a dual GPU. So they're pretty nice. I would like to get a water box for these, but they're very hard to find, and also very expensive. So we'll keep them air cooled for now. I don't use them very often because they are often used or viable for competitions, so I mainly just keep them to look cool on the shelf. Now, moving down to the 4000 series, we start off here with a 4870 Toxic. Now this card is pretty good, but it's also kind of annoying at the same time. The heatsink on it is great. The heat pipes stick out of it, they're pretty crazy. However, we don't have any voltage control for this in any software, which is really annoying, because these older GPUs do like a little bit of juice to get them going. And unfortunately with these Sapphire Toxic cards, they run a custom voltage controller, and yeah, you have to volt mod them to get the maximum out of them. So that's unfortunate, but it's a pretty cool card to have still. Now moving on, we've got a kind of grotty and dirty looking 4850X2 here. Now this card is very, very rare. It's got 4 DVI connections on the back of it, so you can run up to 4 displays, 2 off each GPU. It is a dual GPU card, obviously, with the X2, but it's not the full fat 4870s, so you can see it's got the 8 and the 6 pin connector. It's got 2 separate heat sinks. The VRM is cooled by a heatsink at this end here, but also it has a heatsink on the end as well as on the back of the card down there, which is quite interesting. You can actually crossfire these as well and do 4-way, which is pretty cool, but they are super rare and super hard to find. I managed to pick this one up cheap on eBay, so yeah, that was pretty lucky really, and it does work, which is nice. Now next up, we've got the 4870X2, which is the full fat version of this, so it's 2 of these on 1 GPU. Mine came with a water block, which is really lucky because these cards run super hot. The VRM runs super hot, and you have full voltage control on this card, so you can go up to like 1.35 volts. On air cooling, it just has a big blower style cooler like these. However, it's not see-through, it's just like black plastic. So this card on air runs way too warm, and luckily I picked this up with a water block, so that went pretty well. You can see the water block is quite dirty inside. However, it does work really well and it doesn't leak, so that's all that really matters for me. This card also has little things on the back of the RAM, little heat sinks, just to keep the RAM cool, because the RAM on these older cards, sort of the 4000 and 3000s up there, does get pretty warm. So having those on the back of the card is good, and you put a little bit of a fan on there and it's great. Now running this in Crossfire, I haven't actually tried running it in Crossfire with this, which would be interesting. But I would love to get another one of these for Crossfire, but they are quite expensive, they are quite rare, so we're just keeping the one for now with a water block. It does overclock pretty well, get some good scores, so I'm fairly pleased with that. So moving on to the 5000 series AMD cards over here, we have a 5770, and this is a XFX Black Edition version. Now this originally came from my mate in Canada. He's called Procon. If you want to check him out on YouTube, it's Procon's Tech Center, I believe. I'll put a link in the video description. And he sent me this card all the way from Canada. He benched it a little bit. It overclocks really well, does this particular example. You get full voltage control up to 1.35 volts. If you want to go further, you need either software or hardware modding, but it does work really well. He also sent me a load of other stuff, not just this, from Canada, but this was thrown in, so that's a great little card, I love that. You can run these in Crossfire, but I only have one, so there we go. Now the next couple of cards are 5870s. So I've got 2 of these, both reference PCBs with full cover EK water blocks on them. This one here looks pretty much new. This is a really nice shiny water block here. This one is a little bit better used, a little bit of corrosion maybe in there, but neither of them leak. One of these 2 cards does not work anymore, however they did when I got them. So I have run them in Crossfire before. Got some pretty good scores with those actually, and they are both pretty decent overclockers as well, especially underwater. Got voltage control up to 1.3 or 1.35 volts on these through MSI Afterburner, so that's also very nice. And with the water blocks on, VRM and the core runs pretty cool. Now next up we have the quite legendary 5870 Lightning. Now this card was super rare. MSI didn't make very many of these. It was the first AMD Lightning card MSI ever made, and you can see here the PCB sort of extends right out. They kind of didn't put a big enough cooler on here, did they? Which is quite funny. And it does take the dual 8-pin connectors, unlike the 6 and 6 on the reference PCB cards. Now the nice thing about this card is the VRM just sort of goes on for days, because obviously the PCB is really wide. It has got a couple of extra, I'm not sure whether the voltage read points on here, so that is also quite useful. And you have got full software control with this card up to 1.6 volts in MSI Afterburner Extreme, or the hardware bot version of MSI Afterburner. The only problem is with this card is it doesn't overclock as well as these two cards did on ambient cooling. It's actually quite bad, unfortunately. However, on LN2 it could be better, so I'm kind of waiting to get this on LN2 before I post any scores of it, because it wasn't any good on air, obviously, compared to those. And then even when I put a universal water block on it, it still wasn't quite keeping up with these, which was a bit of a shame. But if I can shove 1.6 volts through it and it scales nicely on LN2, we may be onto a winner just with the nice PCB. Now the final 5000 series card we've got here is the 5970. Now this is one of my favourite dual GPU cards that I've got. I love this nickel water block with the acrylic top from EK here. This water block was pretty much brand new when I bought it off eBay, or I can't remember where I got this off eBay actually. I might have got this off a member of our overclocking team, but it had never been used. He'd bought it new and sort of never used it. And it did come with the nickel backplate as well, so it's a properly nice looking card when it's in your system and you can see all the water going around it and everything. Looks really cool. This is another very, very hot running card on air. The blower cooler on this is quite terrible and very loud. But once you put it under water, it cools down the VRM. Really good job. You can shove a load of voltage through it and then it gets some pretty decent scores. It goes really quick. So I do really like this card. So that's it for the first line of cards. We will move on here to the 6000 series. So starting from the top of the 6000 series, we have the 6750. And fun fact about these, even though it's a super low end card, you can actually run them in 4-way crossfire if you can find a driver that supports it. And I know the one that there is one somewhere, because someone on Hardware Bot have run these in 4-way, which is crazy. But I've only got one at the moment. It's got a Sapphire cooler on it, just a little reference style air cooler, and the bolt pattern is unfortunately too small to fit a universal water block. However, the cooler from the 5770 over there does actually fit this GPU, so if I want a bit of extra performance, I just put that on. It's not worth a lot of points on Hardware Bot, but it is a nice little card, so keep it around. It's not worth much, but it is pretty cool to have around. Maybe one day I'll do 4-way crossfire if I get another 3 of them. Maybe not. So next up we've got the 6870s. I've got 2 MSI Hawk versions of these, which have great software voltage control in MSI Afterburner Extreme and the Hardware Bot version of Afterburner. One of these cards, I'm not sure which, is an absolute beast at overclocking. Is really, really fast on both air and water, and the second one I bought is terrible. So even though they're both the same PCB, same core, one of them's got different RAM. So I think it's LPUDA RAM and the other's Hynix. And the one that's LPUDA, the core clocks terribly, or fairly average. and the memory is really bad. So one of these is really fast, one of them's slow. You can only do two-way crossfire, so I've got two, so I can do crossfire, but one's held back massively by the other. So I'll probably end up selling one of these, the slower one obviously, and try and find a faster one. So next up we have a big long line of 7950s, and I actually have 6 of these. 3 of them are, well, 4 reference PCBs, these 3 here, and the water blocked one down there. They're reference PCB cards. And then I have a Sapphire Toxic and a Power Color PCS++. Now the difference between these is the Toxic and the Plus both have the 8+6 pin and also a different voltage controller to the reference cards. So on the reference cards you get a voltage control up to 1.3 volts. On the PCS++, if you modify Sapphire tricks, you can get pretty much as much voltage as you like, up to 1.6, I think. So that is really cool. This card here, unfortunately, I have to hard mod it to get proper voltage control, which is really annoying. However, this one does overclock pretty well anyway. Now, these 3 cards here are actually all dead. So that's kind of annoying. So the story behind this is I was obviously wanting to do 4-way crossfire, so I had 4 of these because they were really cheap, and I could only run 3-way for ages because I only had boards which had the right spacing and support for 3-way crossfire. So when I finally got a board which could do 4-way, unfortunately I plugged them all in, installed the drivers, and then it started blue screening, so one of the cards had died before I could get a chance to do 4-way. So yeah, it was kind of annoying, and then later down the line, as I've redone 3-way submissions and 2-way submissions, different cards have died. So the 3 reference cards up here are all dead. A couple of them did over 1000 megahertz. I think the XFX one here, which you can only tell by the rear I/O bracket, did 1030 megahertz underwater. I think a HIS one did 1020 or something, and then the other one did like 980 or 990. So they were all pretty decent, but unfortunately they're all dead, so not much use. The Sapphire one still works, but isn't very good. It only does like 980. Obviously I'm limited by voltage on that one. This one here is the best one by far. This does nearly 1100 if I remember correctly, even 1060 on the most vigorous of benchmarks. But unfortunately, after a couple of sessions it developed this weird bug, because I only run this card underwater because it's got 2 screws on the heatsink, and I run a custom version of Sapphire Tricks which allows me to go to 1.4 volts. And unfortunately this card's developed a bug where it only runs the benchmark at like half the clock speed that you set, and then once you set over a certain clock speed it just goes down to 2D clocks and runs really slow. So the card still works, but only at like half speed, so there's something wrong with this one, although it is the fastest one by miles. Now the last one I got, which was this one with a full cover Coolants block here, is not a great card. However, it's the only reference one left that I have working, and it did come in sort of a package deal with the 6990, which I'll get to later down here. So it does look pretty nice. It's been run underwater all its life. It was running Tri-Fire with the 6990, so you know, it's definitely had some crossfire usage, but obviously it's been underwater, so it's been kept cool. So that one does still work, and that's kind of the only one that works properly that I have left, which is kind of annoying. It's just a reference PCB, nothing exciting, bit of a shame, but it works, so that's nice. So next up I have 2 6970s. I have run both of these in Crossfire and individually. Now the first one I got didn't overclock particularly well, so then I got another one and that one doesn't overclock particularly well either. They're not as bad as the bad 6870 over there, but they are kind of both very average cards. Now you have got full voltage control in MSI Afterburner over these cards, so on LN2 or dry ice or sub-zero cooling basically, they may do well. But on ambient cooling, both air and water, they both kind of suck, which is kind of annoying. I might sell both of these and get another one, maybe that's better in the future, we'll see. At least MSI made a decent sized cooler for these anyway, and they've actually got triple BIOS on them, as well as the voltage read points and dual 8-pin connectors. So they are nice cards. They've got a good PCB, they've got all the right features, they just don't overclock very well in the case of these two. So the 6990, obviously I've mentioned this before, this was the first dual GPU that AMD made as a reference card to have two 8-pin connectors. So that's pretty cool. The coolants block does use the stock backplate, and like I said earlier, I bought this off eBay from a guy paired with that card, and both of them already came water blocked, so I've never run this on the air cooler myself. However, the air cooler on this is terrible and very noisy, and the VRMs will run really hot. So having a water block on it keeps the VRM cool, allows you to use really high voltage, well like 1.3, 1.35 volts, which is about as far as you want to go with these before they start exploding and such. On the VRM side, because they only have like 4 phases that are pretty weak. So the water block really helps on the clocks with this, and it does overclock quite well actually. And obviously I can run it in 3-way with either of these two or the 6950. And all the 6950s that I have, by the way, unlock to a 6970. I've only ever had one that hasn't unlocked, so that's pretty good going. So that's it for the 6000 series and the older cards. I'm going to do a split in the video here, and then we're going to move on to the 7000 series. So starting off with the 7000 series here, we have 3 7850s. We've got a Sapphire Dual X, a XFX double dissipation, and a Asus Direct CU2. So starting off with the Sapphire card, this is the first card I bought. Runs really cool with these dual fat heat pipes. Was a pretty nice overclocker when I bought it. It only has a single 6-pin, which you can just see on the end there, if the camera would focus. And it was a pretty decent overclocker, but it doesn't overclock very well anymore for some reason, I'm not sure. I also got this second card really cheap. I think it was like £18 or something. It's a properly nice looking card. It's a decent length, has dual 6-pin connectors, so you think, oh, this card must be ace. Look how much bigger it is than the Sapphire. I mean, it's big, it looks better, it's got dual 6-pin connectors, but unfortunately it doesn't overclock very well, and neither does it cool very well. And if you look on the inside of the cooler here, you'll see that it's got a super thin heatsink. So even though it looks a lot bigger, the Sapphire card was actually always a lot better at overclocking. And I did run these two in Crossfire, and this one held the Sapphire back quite a lot, which is quite sad really, because it does look nice on the shelf, but oh well. Now later on I decided to get the DCU2, because the DCU2 was supposed to be a good overclocker, but unfortunately, even though it overclocks really well, you have to use Asus GPU Tweak to get voltage control, and I absolutely hate Asus GPU Tweak. It is the worst overclocking software ever. Like seriously, seriously bad. Sapphire Tricks, MSI Afterburner, EVGA Precision, all a lot better than this. Just do not use GPU Tweak. Anyway, so this card overclocks really well on the stock voltage, whatever, without any control. I can't get any voltage control to work without the card like randomly blue screening the PC, but I think that's more of a problem with the software rather than the hardware. Other than that, this card is really good, but The other annoying thing about having to use different software to these two is I can't really run them in Crossfire properly, because I have to run two sets of software and they interfere with each other and it all gets messed up. So that's kind of a annoying card, but very fast at the same time, so it's one of those. Moving on anyway, we have the 7950, and I've had this card for absolutely ages. It's a 7950 OCBE, and it's an absolute tank of a card. It just keeps on going. It's done loads of bench sessions, GPU pi for like 40 minutes straight on 1.3, 1.4 volts on the air cooler. It's an absolute monster of a card. It overclocks pretty well. It does about 2200 megahertz on air, and then on water it can do up to like 1300 in some benchmarks. So that's pretty nice. That's obviously with a lot of voltage going through it. Now normally on these cards you can only get to 1.3 volts in MSI Afterburner, but I have kind of worked out a little hack, because this obviously isn't a Lightning or a Power Edition or anything. But I have worked out a little hack where if I modify the BIOS and tell it that it's 1.4 volts or whatever voltage stock, I can actually set that in MSI Afterburner. So that's a clever little trick if you've got one of those, and it does make your card go a lot faster. I really like that card. The PCB is a little bit weak on it, which is disappointing, so if I ever run it on LN2 I'll have to watch out for that. But other than that, it's got a pretty decent core and very good memory on it as well, so I do like that 7950. Now next up, this is one of the OG mining cards. So a guy on Overclockers UK mined on this back when the bitcoins were mineable on GPUs back in 2012 or 2013 or whenever it was. This is a Sapphire Vapor X, if you couldn't tell from the blue PCB and the sort of sapphire looking cooler. And the fan system on it actually died, so you put these huge 38mm thick fans which look really loud but they actually aren't that loud, and he kind of bodged it up with a Molex. So this is a pretty cool card actually. It's like a X mining card. It looks ace on the shelf. Now originally I bought it as not working, and on initial testing it didn't actually work. However, I did try it about 3 months later, and I wiggled it a bit in the PCIe slot and it started displaying something, and then I benched it and it did actually work. It doesn't overclock very well, but it does work. So it is a pretty cool card to have on the shelf as well. So I like that one just as a reminder of the sort of first set of mining wave, so it's pretty cool. Now this next card is one of my oldest cards. This is one I bought originally. This is a 7970 Lightning, my first ever OC card. Got massive voltage control in an MSI Afterburner Extreme. Go all the way up to 1.8 volts on the core, even on air if you want to. It'll die, but you can do it. So yeah, that's pretty ace. Unfortunately it's a bit of a zombie. It tends to die where it artifacts, won't display anything, crashes all the time, and you leave it a few weeks and come back to it and it works perfectly fine. For a couple of hours of course, or until you start overclocking it. So maybe one day I'll run this on LN2, maybe not. It's a bit of a fidgety card, but it does look cool because it's a Lightning, and it was one of my first best cards, and I actually had 3 of these. I RMA'd it twice. First one started artifacting really bad, second one was DOA, this was the 3rd card, this one started artifacting as well, but I couldn't be bothered to send it back to MSI at that point, so I just kept it because it kind of worked sometimes. So yeah, it's a bit sad, but nice PCB all the same. So moving on to the bigger cards now. These are the final 3 AMD cards. This is the 7990, which is quite legendary in the initial Bitcoin mining craze. This one I bought a full cover water block for 30 quid off eBay, which improved it a lot. the air cooler on these cards is actually really nice. It's a dual like heatsink design with triple fans. You might have seen it, and it is actually really nice for like a reference cooler compared to like these blower ones which you used to get on the older dual GPU cards. This 7990 one was actually pretty good. However, the water block helps cool the VRM area, which is down the middle here, really, really well. And it also helps cool the core really well, so that's why I got that. This isn't the best overclocker. It does like high 1100 megahertz, even at 1.3 volts. But it's a 7990. They're getting pretty rare because they've all died from mining. So, yeah, I kind of like this card. It is very long and thin, and the water block does look cool on it. So, yeah, it's a pretty nice card. Now, this next card is the biggest card I own, and I don't think anyone's ever made a bigger card, really, apart from maybe a colourful coup down. But this is like the big daddy. You can see compared to all of the other cards around it, it is like huge. It's a full triple slot card. You can see even compared to the other 7990, it's massive. So this is a Power Color 7990. It came out before the AMD reference one. It has dual heat sinks, which you might be able to see below there. And it also has a pretty beastly 5-phase VRM for each, or it might even be 6 for each GPU core. Unfortunately, it doesn't overclock very well because there's two versions of this. There is this one, which is the standard one, and then there is the Devil 13, which is red and black. Now this is just a black on black one, which unfortunately means it's lower clocked at I think 925 megahertz on both cores, with maybe a boost of 950 on the other BIOS, which is controlled by this cool little switch on the back there. And the Devil was I think 950 on the standard BIOS and 1000 on the full-blown BIOS. However, this card is just absolutely massive. Like, it's extra width, extra height, just in every direction it's huge, so I like to keep it on the shelf. It looks badass, even though it doesn't OC very well. I have crossfired those two together for 4-way, well, I suppose it's 2-way 7990s, but it's like running 4-way 7970s, so you get some monster scores with those two. Although, because they have different voltage controllers, they don't like to play that nice. So they are a right pain to get working together. But once you do, you can get some seriously, seriously monster scores with those. So they are pretty nice cards. Now my newest and fastest AMD card, currently in the fleet, is my Sapphire Nitro Fury, which is, again, it's a pretty big card. Now, unfortunately, I've got it next to the 7990, so it doesn't look big, but compared to some of the other stuff here, it is a pretty meaty card, and it does have a very short PCB as well. So as you can see, the heatsink back here is like super thick. So although the card's only like 2.5 slots or 2 and a bit slots, the heatsink sort of surface area on this card is massive, and it has got a tiny PCB on it. So the other great thing about this card is it overclocks really well. So even though I've never managed to get HBM voltage control working, I do have voltage controlling tricks, thanks to Buildzoid for that, where I can go pretty much as high as I like on the voltage. However, on 1.32 volts, this card does over 1200 megahertz on the core in some benchmarks, 1190, 1180 in others, which is really fast for a Fury, and it actually scales pretty well in terms of benchmark score at those frequencies. So I actually had 2 of these at one point, and I kept the faster one, which was this one. So that is a really nice card. I have actually had a full-blown Fury X in the past and a Vega 56. The Fury X died, which was a bit sad, and the Vega 56 I sold for a profit on eBay because I bought it new and then the prices went up loads because there weren't any in stock and I pre-ordered it, so I sold it on because it was quite an expensive card. It was like £400. This thing was only £200 on eBay quite a while ago as well, and it was in pretty much brand new condition. You can see there's no dust in this card whatsoever, so I was really pleased with this Fury here. It's very nice. I've used it in a lot of competitions, usually paired with a Ryzen 7 1800X, and we get some nice scores in competitions with this card. Love it. Runs really cool as well. Even on the air cooler, talking like 50 degrees max, so that is a pretty crazy card. That is it for the AMDs. We will now move on to the NVIDIAs, which start off down here.